Hello, welcome to the AP7 podcast. You are here with Rachel Donovan and the founder of AP7, Mr. George Helou.
Thanks, Rachel, and thank you for joining us. We love talking about how to get the heart into everything we do to get a lot out of life.
Whether it be relationships, business, careers, you name it. So, let's get started.
So, I am very excited, Craig, to have you here, connecting with me on one of the most important subjects I have known in our struggle in humanity. And you and I, so just for everyone watching or listening, Craig Hamilton interviewed me when I released a book back in, I think it was 2000 or 2001, something around there. And once the interview finished, you and I connected and we had a good chat about life and nature and the struggle to shift from a way of being that's not working to a way that finally allows us to thrive. And we kept in touch since then, and it's been 17 years. And you know what, Craig? I've really enjoyed watching you taking that experience you had in 2000, and you can share in your own way, and we can add a link to your story, and maybe you can give us a quick rundown of that. So it puts in context what you and I are now going to be talking about, and so that people appreciate what you've been through and what legitimacy you have in what you've achieved to allow yourself to manage such a struggle that happened back in 2000. So, yeah, it's been 17 years and here we are. And this is overdue, this conversation.
Yes, it is. I think it is, yeah.
Yeah. And not only is it overdue, but I'm looking forward to more of them. So, Craig, do you want to give us a bit of a background? And then from there, I'd like to talk about mental illness and how we can put ourselves into situations where we're vulnerable and it just takes an event to push us too far.
Well, George, first of all, it's great to be on your show. Thank you for the invitation. My story is actually not unique. There'll be people watching today who are saying, okay, this guy's had an experience with severe mental illness. That's not unique. That's common, far more common than many of us realise. But back in 2000, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And that's a serious mental illness which is characterised by massive mood swings, highs and lows. On the eve of the Olympics, I had a psychotic episode. And this psychotic episode had been preceded by 7 months of acute depression, where I was suicidal, went through suicidal thoughts through that period, was treated for depression, and then within 5 weeks I was manic. And I had a manic episode, which then turned into a psychotic episode, and I was hospitalised, missed the Olympics, given a diagnosis of bipolar 1 disorder. And my life's changed. It's a watershed moment in my life. It still is. But there's been so many good things come out of that period because I've really had to get to know myself, manage the illness, and not just manage it, but thrive. And I know others can. And I think by sharing my story, I've, helped people along the way that have followed with their own experiences. But at the same time, as you know, if you do this work and you share your story, you're helping yourself as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we talked off air about something you call the buffer and how important it is. And I just knew that if we were to understand what creates the vulnerability first, let's explore what creates the vulnerability, which then really does explain that sequence of events that you went through that made you so vulnerable, there was no buffer to help you. And then we should really unpack and what you have been sharing in helping people understand what it means to have a buffer, how to create one. And then I've already got ideas already going through my brain around worthiness, your relationship with yourself, and how you relate to the world around you. That is fundamentally a wonderful contribution to creating the buffer. And then you also mentioned something about competition. And that really helped me understand, okay, so I can see how we put so much pressure on ourselves to push ourselves too far, trying to compete because we're not worthy enough to compete. So there's a lot of elements here. So let's go for a bit of a journey together. And I think from what you've seen from your own life personally and what you see around you, because you've been in this space helping a lot of people, what has been the common elements that have created such vulnerability in us to be so acutely stressed that we really get pushed too far and the brain just snaps?
Well, it's a really good question. I think if we all had the answers, the finite answers to those conundrums, then we would have a quantum leap forward in dealing with human suffering in terms of mental stress, mental illness. So it's a really mental illness in itself, and anything to do with the brain and the mind and the spirit, it's complex. So let's get to the core, what I believe or what I've experienced so far in that period of growth in the last 17 years. I think a lot of the mental illnesses, the root cause is trauma, okay? Trauma. Emotional trauma, which can be psychological, emotional trauma from childhood, where there has been some type of, in the family relationship, a breakdown in the family. There could be abuse within the family, which on any level, which obviously has a negative impact on the individual as a child. Now, all of that stuff, we all carry our wounds with us, even though we think, and we carry them into adulthood unless we're conscious of them. Right? So those things I think are significant, right? They're significant. So there's trauma. There is also the ego, and you talk about competing, and we ask about competing. Exactly what I've experienced as well. Now, most of us are competing with other people all the time, whether it's for a job, whether it's for our own self-esteem. We're comparing ourselves to other people, which I now know is fruitless. It's pointless. We are who we are. What we have to be comfortable with, learn to be comfortable with, is to be comfortable with who we are and with ourselves, because the only people we spend 24 hours a day, 7 days a week with is us.
I know. I checked that recently.
Yes. So if you're not comfortable with yourself, and that's a challenge for most of us, certainly a challenge for me.
It's definitely a work in progress for all of us.
It's a work in progress for all of us.
Yeah.
So there's those things, and the ego. The other observation I'd make about the ego is, for a lot of us, and let's use the example of the professional sportsman or the high profile athlete who, when their career finishes, they fall in a heap. They have a breakdown. They don't cope, and because the fame is gone in some cases, the money is gone, and they wonder, well, if I'm not that person anymore, who am I? Who the hell am I? So what I've realised, George, is that if you said to me, if we met for the first time, we didn't know each other, if you said to me, who are you? I wouldn't say, I'm Craig Hamilton, I'm a broadcaster, I'm an author, I'm a public speaker, I'm married with 3 children, I live in Newcastle. If I was absolutely honest, consciously, I'd say, hi, George, I'm Craig, and I'm doing my best. Right?
Yeah. Craig, I have to tell you, average about one new person a day that I meet in my capacity as a coach, right? And I ask this question to every single one of them. Who is the real you? And 99%, 0.5 roughly, don't know.
Yeah.
And because they don't know, then we know that humanity has an identity crisis. Our insecurity comes because we're not actually deeply connected to the core of who we are, our substance, why we're worthy, why we matter, and why we're here to connect and engage. And as a result, what you're explaining to me is that when we hook into some role, some performance that says we're worthy, whether it be an athlete or anything, and then suddenly it's gone, then we're thrown into the abyss like we are nothing. And that's not fun. And we owe it to ourselves, don't we, to create an environment where we're connecting to who we are outside of these things.
Yeah, exactly. And look, we are all a work in progress. And, I'm not coming on your program to say I've got all the answers. I've always said to people that if somebody sits you down over a cup of coffee and says, I have all the answers here, get up and go, run. Because
that's mania.
Exactly. There's no such thing. We're all learning, and we should, I think you can learn from every engagement you have personally.
What I find most frustrating, Craig? Every time I think I know it all, I crash. And I go, oh, man, I need to learn this lesson. I don't know much at all. How about I just chill out in humble zone and just stay a sponge? And I've had a really good life since I made that decision.
Exactly. It's made a huge difference to me, and it does take the pressure off. It releases an enormous amount of pressure, and you actually do live in the moment. And wiser men than me have said that's where the money is. It's in the present moment, because everything that happens in our lives happens in the present. 10 years ago, and I always say when I speak, particularly if it's school kids, I'll say, what's the most important day of your life? And some will say, the day I made the cricket team, or the day I made the footy side, or the day I became school captain, or the day I graduated from university, day I got engaged, day I got my first job. And I said, well, look, all of those things are great things, and they're great achievements, and they give you a lot of enjoyment in reflecting on them. But I would argue that the most important day of your life is today, because it's the only day you've got, and it's the only day I've got. It's the only day any of us have, is right here, right now.
Well, Craig.
So, talking to you right now is, I've got nothing else on my mind. I'm not distracted in any other way by any of those monkey mind thoughts. And so I feel very comfortable having the conversation and sharing some ideas.
Absolutely. And, when I first started podcasting, I was overthinking. I was too busy in my head. But after the 12th one, roughly, with Rachel and I think we've done about 60 podcasts now. And I noticed, and Rachel noticed, that we just stopped caring about what we needed to be, and we just started to have a conversation on things that mattered. And that meant that we were finally present, that we could actually just have a conversation about important topics that we all can relate to. And then by shaking up a few problems, looking at the details long enough, things emerge that could be of value. And that's a discovery. That's an adventure for all of us. We don't have enough conversations with each other around important topics anymore. And I think that if we have to create opportunities like this, then, we should.
Do you know why we don't have those conversations, George?
I think that, I can blame social media and screen time and people being isolated and losing their social skills. I also know there are a lot of taboo topics like mental illness. So people are almost afraid. They feel they're out of their depth. They feel they're going to be politically incorrect if they talk about it. They feel they're going to offend someone accidentally. So there's some of the things that have come to mind. Where are you coming from with that? I
agree with both of those ideas. I think the first thing that springs to my mind is social media. And I don't bash social media. I use social media.
Yeah, me too.
I have with, as a broadcaster, as a writer, as a speaker. You communicate what you do. If you believe in what you do and you want to make a difference in other lives, positive difference, then you need to let people know about it. It's no good sitting up saying, I'm going to change the world here if no one knows what you're offering. So, but I think the problem with social media is the overuse of social media. So that every conversation is limited now to 240 characters. For instance, on Twitter or Instagram, you only ever see the glossy photograph on Instagram. Everyone's having a great time on Instagram. Pretty much the same on Facebook. And so it's a post. You don't get into those deep, meaningful conversations that might actually prick someone's consciousness or have those light bulbs. So I try to, put things up that are inspirational for people, that might actually inspire them, that might encourage a bit of thinking. So I think that's an issue. I also, the big tick for me for social media is the fact that people who don't mix socially very well, they're shy, they're anxious, they have an ability to engage via social media. So that gets a big tick. I think that's very valuable. But having the conversation, there's nothing that annoys me more than going out to a cafe and seeing 6 friends together and they're all on their phones.
I know.
Every single one of them are on there checking their Facebook or their Instagram. They're not there engaging in a conversation. And that's the reality. So I think we're losing the gift of conversation and direct communication through those types of, things.
Craig, when we look at where is this going, if you were to prolong that habit of disconnection, where you're not having that real depth, where the heart feels a belonging, where those little moments of instant gratification that come from someone liked a post or, that's not enough. We need more substance than that. We need to be there for each other in more deep and meaningful ways. We need affection. We need to really listen and dig deep into where someone's really at and add value with how much we care. And if we're not doing that, then what is the compounding effect of too many people slipping into perpetual isolation? You know what that tells me? It tells me that mental illness is only going to get worse if we're creating an environment of vulnerability so that there is no buffer anymore.
Yeah. Look, I think that's a really good point. And the depression rates since my experience in 2000, they've gone up. The numbers have gone up. They haven't come down, and they're still rising. So something's not right when we're getting kids as young as 10 presenting with depressive illness, 15 years of age. We've got self-harm issues with our teenagers because they're so traumatised within themselves. They're experiencing so much pain, whether it's been through depression, anxiety, and other forms of mental illness, that they're not trying to end their lives. They're just trying to get relief from the internal pain that they're in. And we have this, it's almost like things like Facebook and Messenger, we're teenagers, and this comes down to the online bullying. Online bullying, very prevalent today. And for you and I, who've come through the mill and, we might have experienced schoolyard bullying, it's a totally different kettle of fish now because it just doesn't happen at school. It happens at school and then after school, if the kids are online. It might be happening 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 p.m. It could be at 1 p.m. if they're still on their devices. And they're getting hammered. And if somebody says you're not worthy and and criticises them personally in some very, very ordinary ways, many kids believe it. That's the first thing they do is they believe it must be right because someone said that. Our kids need to know that just because someone has that opinion of you doesn't mean that you have that. The uplifting or the learnt self-esteem. And that's what it is, self-esteem. No one can give you self-esteem. You've got to develop it. That's where the power is to grow.
Craig, I've got to share this quick story, and it just shows you how social media wouldn't have allowed this to have happened. When I was in high school, I was hypersensitive to becoming bullied. So if anybody tried to sledge me, if I felt like they were just trying to push me down, I would overreact to defend myself, right? And I remember this Greek young gentleman, he turned around and I can't remember what he said, but I just felt this rage to defend myself pump through me. And I turned around and I said, F off and I'll break your face, like a real threatening thing. And I remember that in my world, he was really, really trying to hurt me. But when I said what I said, Craig, I saw in his eyes hurt and fear as I said that.
Yeah.
And it jolted me out of what I thought was going on, and it connected me to a human being that had good intentions and was vulnerable. And here I was thinking he's the bully and I need to out-bully him. Now, the problem with keyboard worrying, in social media is if someone says something like that and you retaliate really aggressively, you don't see their reaction. You don't see that they didn't mean to hurt you. And I can see how things can escalate and downward spiral for a lot of people. And young people who are still trying to get some sense of identity, are going to feel a lot more vulnerable, and they're going to struggle a lot more. And for me, and, we've had conversations in the past about depression. Do you know, I have a lot of clients that come to me who, when they're trying to tell me they're depressed, they won't use the word. Yeah. I mean, the fact that they've come to me is already they're trying to avoid being labeled, right? And I don't do labels anyway. I understand them, but I don't do them because at the end of the day, there are reasons for everything. And if you're going to get depressed, why don't you just say, look, this is really depressing. I'm so depressed by this. Or, oh my gosh, I don't know how I got to this point, but now I'm just down all the time without even when good things are happening. And I really want to understand how I got to this point, because I want to go deep into what triggered me in the past, or whether there were too many things that pushed me down too far. And my naughty brain has wired subconsciously for me to be withdrawn constantly, expecting more of the same, whether it's relevant or not. Yeah. This is the conversation we should be having about depression.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, with its stigma, we end up feeling almost like a bit of shame and inadequacy, this sense of we have to hide the fact that we're depressed. And how the hell are we going to address it?
Yeah, exactly. That's a really good point. As you know, when we first spoke was 17 years ago. 17 years ago, I was in a psychiatric ward in Newcastle, and I'd missed the Olympic Games as a broadcaster. So, talk about a fall from grace. I'm just about to work on the biggest show on the planet as in the career that I love as a sports broadcaster. So it's the pinnacle. Yes. And within 3 days, my life's changed, and I'm in, on strict watch inside a psychiatric hospital. So when you come out, you're learning. You basically got to start from scratch. And I've used the term, not only do you have to put Humpty Dumpty back together, you've got to unscramble the egg first.
Yeah, gotcha.
It's a two-pronged rebuild. So for the last 17 years, that's what I've been doing. And look, I wouldn't wish the experience I had on my worst enemy. But given where I am today, it has been the catalyst for change and growth, as painful as it was. And the thing I realised by the time I got to 2004, so 4 years after that, I wrote Broken Oak, the first, and it was very raw, it was out there, it was honest, it was authentic, and it's, for many people, was hard to read because of the fact it was so confronting and the subject matter was taboo. It was bipolar disorder, it was mental illness, it was depression. To write that book, I had to be in a position where I didn't care anymore what anyone else thought about me. And that's
a massive step. That's a massive step to take.
Yeah.
What helped you? What helped you get to that point where you could genuinely detach and decide you mattered enough not to worry about opinions of other people?
Well, I got to a point where I was angry, right? And the anger,
I knew that emotion had a purpose.
Yeah, the anger had nothing to do with me missing the Olympics, you know. And that was totally irrelevant to this anger. The anger was that I had the realisation that my experience happens all around Australia every day. We don't read about it because the subject is taboo. Families experience it. Individuals experience it, and they do so in their recovery, like I did for the first part of the journey, with one arm tied behind your back, because you're fighting not only the illness and the fact that it's a tough competitor, you're not doing it with all the tools, because you want to keep the whole thing to yourself. Your family gathers around you and says, oh, look, no one can find out about this. This is, this is embarrassing, the stigma around this. I got to the point where I thought, you've got a choice here, Craig. You're either part of the solution or you're part of the problem. You're one or the other.
What a moment. What a pivotal moment. What a choice.
Yeah, but I saw it as being quite clear at that time. To be part of the solution was to tell the story. Open things up, and hence the title of the book, Broken, Open. It was not my title, so it was brilliant. It fitted the story beautifully. So you're either part of the solution or part of the problem, and the problem, of course, was the silence, the secrecy, the stigma that we don't talk about, and that's been there for centuries, not decades, centuries around mental illness. And if I can share one quote with you, and I get inspired by quotes. I love quotes, going back through the course of history that, people have said and they have great insights. It was Martin Luther King, okay? So when we were sitting down as a family deciding, are we going to do this book? Because it's okay if I was fine with it, but I've got other people in my life who are going to have people they know read this book, and are they going to be okay with it? So we had plenty of family meetings and to decide whether it would be a yes or a no. But around that time, I picked the book off a shelf, and it's almost like it fell off the shelf. One of those moments, the book falls into your hand, you open it, and there's the quote. And Martin Luther King said back in 1967, our lives begin to end when we remain silent about things that matter.
I love that quote.
It's a classic, and you can put it into any scenario in anyone's life, in your life, and it's the truth. Our lives begin to end when we remain silent about things that matter. And I thought, well, this matters, and if I'm silent about it, my life will begin to end. I might live to be 110, but my life won't become what it could be if I open up about this and I can actually make a difference. So that was another fork in the road, and that made it a lot easier it was the right decision to write the book, and it was then and it is today.
Craig, EP7 is a sponsor of a Man Enough campaign by the Happiness Co, and they're encouraging men to talk about their struggle, their depression. And it's such an important movement because, as you can see, if you can talk about it, and then what are you going to discover? You're going to discover you're not alone, that the issue, that the pressure you're putting on yourself is completely unnecessary, and that other people who've done that have hurt themselves so badly they were no good to anyone. Like, let the truth bubble to the surface so that you could be let free from all the nonsense we're raised to take on as a society, all that pressure, all that competition. So I'm joining the dot here where at some point I'm going to talk to the guys at Happiness Co about having a chat with you, because I think that your story and your conversation about that decision you made, that really cuts a beautiful path for many men who burden themselves to need to have their act together. The VB man.
Of course,
tough enough man.
We are conditioned that way, and that's not a criticism of our parents or society at the time we're growing up. It's just the way it's always been. It's been that men will be resilient. You will be tough. You won't be like your sister. You won't show your emotions. If you get hurt, you won't let on that you're hurt. You certainly won't cry because girls cry. And so and as you become a man and you go through teenage years and into your 20s, you're expected to build this armour. You just keep layer and layer and layer of armour to be tough, resilient, catch and kill your own. Don't show any form of weakness. But your emotions, as I found out, are incredibly powerful. While ever you just and this sense of denial that there is any stuff emotionally going on within you is it is denial. Of course, there's an impact, and it doesn't matter how tough you look on the outside, the exterior, how well built up this facade is that we are 10 foot tall and bulletproof. We're all vulnerable. We all can be vulnerable. There's nothing wrong with being vulnerable, and there's nothing wrong with putting your hand up and saying, I'm going through a tough time at the moment, because you used the word, I think, at the start of this podcast. This is a breakthrough, not a breakdown. And that was, I now view my experience in 2000 as not a breakdown, a breakthrough. It was almost like I had to be smashed and smashed and smashed and smashed until finally there was a moment of realisation, and then you go. It's difficult to describe to people who haven't been through that situation, but it's free. It's free, and then you start to make different choices every day, and views change, and you realise that you can't spend every moment of every day wishing that the world would change when you realise the only thing you've got any control over is yourself and how you interact with the world. So you got to, if you want to change the world, it's an old saying, start by changing yourself. And the great film, you will remember this film. I say to anyone who wants to get a bit of insight into what I'm talking about here, if it sounds a bit like double Dutch, is go and get the film Groundhog Day.
Oh, yes. That was a great movie.
The Bill Murray film. And that basically will give you a very good idea of how he had to change. Then he got slapped across the face plenty of times before he did.
You know what was funny? It was like he was in his head and he was trying to analyse how to get what he wanted only in his head. And what I loved about that movie was finally he realised he had to be actually genuine and authentic and just stop being so attached and believe in himself, have a better relationship with himself, and then suddenly it flowed into a destiny that he deserved. But when you were describing before this tough man and you don't cry and you're the resilient one, as you kept describing that, what I could see was there was no heart represented. It was just the man is for survival and the woman is for nurturing. And she gets to be sensitive and nurturing for the young, and you get to be the tough exterior shell. It's all based on an ugly world. Get your young taken care of because they're vulnerable with nurturing and sensitivity because they need it. But then you're the outer shell as the man. But the truth is we're not in that world. We're in a world where we're meant to be connecting, creating, innovating, and truly celebrating that beautiful unity of being there for one another. And the last time I checked, our biochemistry is all about emotion. Like, you can't experience life without emotion. So this idea that you have to pretend it doesn't exist and you have to suppress it, if you constantly suppress and not represent your emotions, emotions are simply chemicals that are facilitating what emotional state, what state to be in to facilitate actions. If we're going to start to complicate that relationship rather than understand it and help us understand, well, what possible rationalizations are happening in the brain that makes us feel this way so that we can understand what's going on. Am I being too hard on myself? Am I being too competitive for all the wrong reasons, not giving myself permission to be myself, be an individual, learn, grow, keep improving on my terms, and how that becomes a value for others, how that fits in the larger scheme of things. Let me just embrace that, not just have to be something, be everything for other people to say, I'm okay, I'm worth loving.
Yeah, that's right. The needing to be validated by someone else to feel okay about yourself is a one-way ticket to disappointment, because it's not going to happen. It's a short-term fix. If somebody, it's like that short-term fix, that little adrenaline shot you get on Facebook or on social media when someone likes your post. That's the addictive nature of what's the feel-good chemical? Serotonin.
And dopamine.
Dopamine. You get a little hit when someone likes you. You check your Facebook feed. Oh, look, I've got 60 people like what I've posted, and now I feel good about myself. There's the validation. You look at your Facebook post, and no one has liked your post, so immediately you're down in the dumps. They're relying on what someone else thinks to determine how you feel about yourself. I shake my head. And this is why, and it's easier for you and I because we didn't grow up in the social media era. Social media's come late for us, but for the kids who are coming through now and know nothing other than social media, I think it's a big thing, and I think that's why there is these fluctuating emotions which can be overwhelming, and they are so reliant on the feedback they're getting from others on social media. And it does come back to self-worth. You know, if somebody tells you, and this is where the traumas come in on an emotional level from very young age, if somebody in your family or your close-knit group, your peer group, tells you often enough that you're not worthy, that you will never make anything out of yourself, you will never succeed, you will never become anything, eventually you'll believe that as a kid, because you won't have the filter system to be able to say, listen, mate, you wait, I'll show you. Because, I don't know too many kids who are that precocious. Those lessons come later after a lot of work. We've got a lot of kids, and some of the great teachers, some of the great inspiring speakers today have come through that process. And they talk about how Dr. John DeMartini as well, I don't know if you're familiar with his work.
I am.
He writes about how he was told right up until the age of 17, he had dyslexia, I think, he had learning problems, and he was told by his family, you'll never make anything of yourself. And he believed it, absolutely believed it. And it wasn't until somebody gave him, inspired him and said, you are going to make something of yourself. You have got some abilities inside you that you haven't even tapped into yet. And that was enough to set him on the path that he's on today. And he's speaks around the world. So exactly. I'm getting off a little bit off track here with the whole worthiness thing. Very quickly, the emotions you talked about and the how they can be, the average tough, macho Australian male or says, oh no, I can handle my emotions. I can deal with my emotions. They don't impact on me. I'm in control. Yet in this country, we have a huge problem with alcohol. We have a huge problem with drugs. And in my view, a lot of the issues around there are self-medication issues.
Yeah.
It's socially acceptable in Australia to drink a lot. It's been going on since the Rum Rebellion.
Yeah.
Right? So back in the convict days. But if we dig down a little bit and we think, well, look, why are people abusing alcohol to those levels? I think, well, they're trying to keep a lid on their emotions and they're trying to self-medicate why they're not feeling, to deal with emotions of not feeling very good about themselves.
Spot on. And, going back to this worthiness issue, if you don't feel worthy and you've had a few traumatic experiences where you tried something but you epically failed and you were either punished for it, ridiculed for it. Now, the brain's going to wire to be incredibly anxious and self-doubting in situations where you are called on to have a go. And what you'll either do is you'll either do it badly because you're overthinking and expecting bad outcomes, or you'll shy away and you'll learn to dream small and avoid all opportunities to satisfy this heart with some adventure, some satisfying achievement, right?
Yeah.
Now, where I'm going with this is that if you have been pushed too far under a set of circumstances in the way your parents role modeled how hard you need to be on yourself, how much you need to be a superstar to be worthy. Do you know that I've distilled down with people when I do personal assessment, for me to be loved, I need to be perfect. Now, think about that. That's not me making up this belief. This is us discovering it's absolutely wide in assumptions in the brain, subconsciously. And because it's subconscious, Craig, you can't address it. It means now everything has to go through the filter of I'm not perfect enough, so therefore I'm not going to be loved, period, right? Now, that's some serious vulnerability. So what happens is that when you're pushed too far and the brain has been told very clearly that the world is not for you, it's looking for every excuse to hurt you, and you are a fraud, an imposter, because you know you're not perfect. I know you're trying to be, but you're not, and you never will be. Then to me, that's on the door of a breakdown. And if you were to have 1, 2, or 3 incidences that was to punch you hard enough, that brain will literally rewire in desperation to assume that you are in an intense war zone. And in that war zone, this is me just playing out a scenario with you just to see where you're at with this, right? In that intense war zone, you've got 2 options. Either you must fight and believe you are invincible and make yourself strong and push. So in other words, there's megalomania to cope. Or you downward spiral and become paranoid and assume everyone's out to get you and your brain's just assuming everything is toxic. So I could see how the brain can go one way or the other. And from everything that I've understood of these sorts of manic breakdowns and everything, it does, doesn't it? It does go one way or the other. But do you know where I'm going with this? We no longer can be present. Suddenly the brain has decided for you from moment to moment that you're in a war zone and you have to either be the star and be in denial of what's really going on, or you have to watch out and run and look. And so what do we see? We see mental illness because suddenly we're pushed too far and we can't even be present anymore to what's really going on.
You haven't got a degree in psychiatry, have you?
No, I don't. And you know what? Because I don't spend a lot of time trying to understand, therefore, what chemicals we need to help someone restore balance. But I actually see that.
I was being facetious.
I'm glad.
Being facetious because I think that's an incredibly insightful way of looking at the whole issue. I think you're really close to some golden nuggets there. You're getting into the area of the flight and fight response, which is at the very core of every human being. When pressed hard enough, pushed hard enough into a corner of stress and breakdown, the human brain will go, I've got 2 options here to get myself out of this war zone that you described. I'm either going to fight the war or I'm going to run. It's about survival. It's about core survival technique. Do what I can to survive. And when you're at that point, your brain is in overload. So you're on the verge that, you're either in mania, you're in psychosis at that point if you have no other option. So then the world is you are getting spun around big time. You are in the washing machine. You're like a cork floating around the ocean. You've lost your grip on reality and you've lost control of yourself. There's a book, I'm not sure who wrote it. It's a well-known book called The Brain That Heals Itself.
Yes, I know that book.
Neuroplasticity. I think it's a great book. I believe that the brain is capable of healing itself from these traumas and moving forward and growing, and not, this is what I'm talking about with recovery from mental illnesses, not only recovery but flourishing, because you can develop these new pathways. You've got to believe that you can, and it's not a case of you're pigeonholed in there. That's the illness you have. You may as well just forever take your medication to manage that illness. Don't do any work on yourself. Don't explore these other areas of, self-growth because it's a waste of time, which I don't believe for 1 minute. I think there's a huge amount you can do. And in terms of the neuroplasticity of the brain, I haven't had my brain X-rayed or MRI'd or whatever they do to have a look what's going on in there. I would be very surprised if my brain today on one of those images, if it looked exactly like it did 15 years ago or even 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. I think it would look significantly different because I think there's new pathways there. I know there are.
Absolutely. Black and white. 100%. You have created so many new pathways that dignify you, that allow you to connect to people. And then you know what you did? You kept reinforcing them. And you know what they ended up becoming? Neural highways, which meant that suddenly you're just not even trying to love yourself for who you are, give yourself permission to have a journey, not to need to be everything to everyone, not to have to. You're just naturally being this way, right, Craig?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, you are a pin-up boy for what it means to go from that extreme back in 2000 into finally, you see, I said to you a few years ago, I said at some point, Craig, you're going to have to drop the label that the institutions want to keep on you at some point because your brain is that plastic, you can rewire into a way of being that you keep the wisdom of being the old way, but you're no longer wired to be that way. No,
that's right. I don't let bipolar disorder define me, not for a minute. That's not who I am. It's a diagnosis which was required to explain the experience of depression, of mania, of psychosis, which people experience, as I said, every day. We just don't hear about it that often. And when the moods are as extreme from high to low or from depression to mania to psychosis on this massive big roller coaster, then you've got to explain it somehow. And bipolar disorder used to be called manic depression. It's the same thing. Bipolar is pretty well, the name, I think, is a fair reflection of what the disorder is like. You're either really high, you're really at the North Pole, which is mania or psychosis, and the South Pole is depression. So, but it doesn't define me. I don't walk around every day going, I'm Craig and I'm bipolar. I don't even think about it. Every day I'm living my truth and I'm living the tools that I've developed to stay well and thrive, which is very quickly making sure I get good sleep, eating well, barely touching alcohol, having good work-life balance, not being too busy, having a good, making sure I exercise, making sure I'm physically fit, are all things that are important to me. Engaging socially with people, seeing friends, seeing family, and taking the heat off myself and not trying to be perfect.
That's beautiful.
You mentioned perfectionism. Well, I'm a reformed perfectionist.
I like it.
I was discharged from rehab. I was put in rehab to get rid of or deal with my perfectionism. And it is a one-way ticket to disappointment. No one's perfect, but most of us are conditioned to believe we have to be, as you rightly said.
Craig, we should start a group called Perfection Anonymous. I am 3,422 days perfectionism free.
Yeah, exactly. And so now one of the great things, the thing that amuses me most, and I amuse myself every day. No one makes me laugh more than I make myself laugh, which I think is great.
That's good.
Because if I'm having a good time, I think most of the people around me are having a good time. And at the end of the day, though, George, anyone else who gets a laugh out of my attitude or my life, that's a bonus. That's only a bonus as long as I'm having a good time. But the thing that amuses me most is that I don't have to try. And I'm happy with not being perfect. I just do my best, and my best will be good enough. I'll put my head on the pillow every night. I won't relive the day. I'll just say, Craig, I'm very comfortable that today you've done as well as you could. You only got 3 things done that were on your list of 5 things to do. Your goals, that's okay. We'll do them tomorrow. And if they're not that important, we won't do them at all.
Well, Craig, this conversation needs to continue. So I'm going to wrap up with you now, but there's a part 2. And what you and I will do is we'll unpack that whole journey of healing and we'll focus on neuroscience. Those tips that you were giving were really fundamental to the buffer when you're well rested and you're truly connected. There was a lot of wisdom in that. So let's unpack all that, and I'll add value where I can with EP7, this whole idea of being adaptable and just embracing what else can I be different to help me connect better, to help me appreciate who I am better. So let's do that in our part 2. Let's make that happen soon.
Okay, I look forward to that. Thank you, George.
Thank you, Craig. It's been fantastic. Bye for now.
Thank you for joining us on another EP7 podcast. If you liked what you heard, remember to share and subscribe so you're notified of every podcast released. If you have any questions or would like to connect with us, please jump on the EP7 official Facebook page. We'd love to hear from you.